Morning, everybody. Welcome to a red tea session this morning. This is number 6. This is Luxuriant Bangs out of a 9-set series. This is the third one from the Chiman series. So remember, we call that Chihun, which specifically relates to an area in Anhui province. It's a county, Chiman County, produces wonderful tea. It is the most famous red tea in the world. So that's where we've been these last 3 weeks, or this is the third week of that. First 3 weeks, we were in Yunnan. So we've had this adventure. We've had different ways of handling the tea in terms of processing is really what I'm referring to. Today, when we look at Luxuriant Bangs, we're going to look at one that's less handled than the other two Chihun teas. So last week was highly handled. The first week, or the 2 weeks ago, was a little bit less handled, but more rolled. And this will be the least of the three. So, what's going on in the shop in this week? Well, we have finally got a date that we're leaving. We'll be headed out towards Asia on March 8th. We'll send out an email when our last day will be, and it will probably be March 7th, but I'll send out a confirming email to that effect.
April 7th?
Say,
April 7th? Oh, your last day open here, March
yeah,
7th?
last day open
Great.
here, yeah. And then in terms of coming back, I'll send out a confirming email once that's all squared away. So we're getting very close. So if you have tea that you need, now is a good time to think about that. And this next, 3 weeks or so would be a great time to pick it up, put it in order and pick it up. So that's what we're looking forward to over this next month. We're excited about this trip. A lot of things that we hope to accomplish on this trip. We'll see how it goes. So Luxuriant Bangs. Before we jump in directly to Luxuriant Bangs, let's talk about red tea more generally for a minute. We've talked about the process a little bit, and we've talked about that it's a fairly straightforward process, but as you get to more crafted tea, there's more steps. So the most crafted tea that we talked about was last week. That's the Bedrock. And the Bedrock had 16 steps or so. Intimate has about, which was the first one in this Chihun series, has about 12 or 13 steps. And Luxuriant Bangs has around 11 to 12 steps. So it's less processed. And when you look at the leaf, you'll be able to tell it's a little less processed. When you have a less processed tea, the actual chemical configuration of the tea is different as well. So that's an interesting thing about the red teas. More process produces one sort of chemical composition. Less process produces another. What sorts of things get affected? So catechin production gets affected. More process, especially at the craft level, seems to leave more catechins, surprisingly, in the tea leaf. The less process that you see today will have more amino acids and more theobromine in it. For you as tea drinkers, that doesn't much matter. Science, it matters because, trying to figure out what's in the tea and how it affects flavor and so forth. That's something important that scientists work on. But for you, the consumers, no. What you're interested in is the taste and the color, the aesthetics, and what energy it brings to you. Generally speaking, again in China, when you're talking about the most famous of the red teas, you have to say it's the Qihun. That doesn't mean the Dianhun, which is the Yunnan, isn't famous. It's famous, all right, but historically, Qihun is longer and it's touched more of the world. Is red tea produced anywhere else in China? Absolutely is. It's produced in 19 provinces, including 2 provinces for which it is more of an experiment. So they're actually experimenting in growing this tea in Xinjiang province. And this other thing that I'm about to tell you will blow you away. They're experimenting in certain parts of Tibet. Now, when we think of Tibet, we think of a plateau that would be too high, too cold, winters too long. However, remembering that it borders Yunnan, there are some places, some valleys where they're experimenting with it to see whether they might be able to produce a good crop of tea there. And it's misleading, isn't it, when I say they're experimenting as if they're planting a tea that's called red tea. They're planting tea there and they're producing it in a red tea manner. That's really what I mean to say. So why haven't you heard of all these other places? Well, if you had traveled in China, you would have heard of some of these other places where they're producing red tea. It's just in smaller quantities. Are any of these places as famous as, say, Qimen and as famous as Dianhun or the Yunnan tea? Well, actually, there is one place, and it's a couple places in Fujian province. One is Tongyang craft teas. Tongyang craft teas are very famous.
Looks like there's speakers on both sides, actually.
Another place is Shaozhong. And Shaozhong really isn't a place, it's more a style that comes from the Wu Mountains. So they say Shaozhong, and what that really means is small varietal. And these small varietals include the smoky pine. There's others. You're going to try one in the upcoming 3 weeks. And so, again, there's many, many places that produce. It's just not in the quantities, not of the overall famousness. Sichuan produces. I think I may have mentioned close to where Dragonwell is grown. They produce. Not much though. And some years they produce and some years they don't. So you've got red tea that's being produced all over, but not much of it is craft. The Qimen is really, really craft. And that's one of the, or Qihun, I should say, is crafted tea. And that's one of the reasons it's become famous worldwide, because it's so crafted and unusual. It takes all these steps, and the flavor profile is so unusual. The flavor profile of some of these others is unusual, particularly the Fujian ones. And again, you'll have a chance to taste that in the upcoming 3 weeks. You'll taste one of those. But overall in the world, it's the Qihun and the Yunnan Reds, which are the most famous. Yes.
We knew from your previous presentations that Yunnan is pretty tough to get to compared to Qimen.
Yeah.
But Is there a connection also with the ongoing elevation of Cheeman? There's history, but is there also the political connection to the county? Like, are there other ways in which the county is also important to China as a whole that may have led to its ongoing vigor as a famous tea producing county?
Interesting question. So the question really talks about what sort of history does Chiman have outside of tea that would have made it famous overall in China and famous in the world? And realistically, there's none. Realistically, when you talk about Chiman County, it's really the tea that made it famous, not the other way around, some event or something happening there. And so that's what's really interesting about it, because if you didn't have this tea, you wouldn't have heard of Chiman County. And the real thing about Chiman County is there's two types of famousness, aren't there? There's the famousness of the tea overall, which existed from before the Tang Dynasty. And of course, it was being produced as green tea back then, right? And then there's the famousness of it since it's been producing red tea. And it's been producing red tea since about 1875 or so, maybe a little earlier, a few years earlier. But that's roughly. And the famousness of that also has to do with its connection to the world, because this tea became famous in the Britain and on the continent, European continent. So the result is this area became very familiar to Europeans, because it's like, where's my tea coming from? And it's coming from this area. So great question though, because you're right. Sometimes an event or a product seems to be what's driving the famousness until you look at the history, and then you realize, oh, there's a history behind this. And then you talk about the product itself as, but this isn't what happened here. It was the product first and really only. Now, are these places beautiful places? From a tourist perspective, these places were always going to be famous because they are beautiful, they're isolated, and tea in effect maintains that. Because when you grow tea and produce tea, it's not highly polluting, and it doesn't eradicate or erode the landscape. So the result is that's unlike an industrial crop, which can have an effect on landscape because, oh, you're having to make it all look a certain way, or you're putting a lot of fertilizer on, things like that, or you have to have lots of transportation nodes into the area. This is not the case with the tea in these areas. Yes.
You're asked, if all true teas come from the Camellia sinensis plant, do different cultivars lend better to different types of tea? So someone might find an ancient tea tree and have a sense of what type of tea it would be best for.
So this question is really interesting because Peter asks, is there a relationship between cultivar / hybrid and the type, the end result that would be made from the tea? And so this is a semi-complex question. It's not an automatic yes or no. I mean, so let's back up. Ancient tree tea can be made into all the same styles, but it typically isn't. And one of the reasons is history. Another reason is ease of production. So for example, you normally wouldn't think of doing yellow teas with ancient tree. And part of it is you need more storage. It's a different methodology. Could you do yellow? You absolutely could. Would it be as good? Don't know. Don't know. The red teas, because there's less sensitivity, especially connected with the environment. So what do I mean by that? When you think of Yunnan, some of Yunnan is highly humid. Therefore, storage is a problem. Production can be a problem. And therefore, trying to, for example, keep green tea fresh, Yunnan's harder. Does it mean it's impossible? No, it's not impossible. It's just harder. You somehow need more elements in a way to keep it fresh. Whereas red tea is a little easier to keep fresh. It ages in a different way. So when you're talking about red tea or fermented tea, they all age in different ways. And they're looking to age those teas, 10, 20, 30 years. And so there is that difference. Yes.
And in that answer, I think I'm hearing that, then the choice about how to process the tea from whatever beautiful plant or tree that you find is not generally driven by the cultivar itself, but by these other factors: storage, timing. How do you keep the tea fresh? What are your environmental factors? How much can you invest in the process to create a final product? Am I hearing you right?
Mostly. So I like that summary because the summary is, it is about location. It is about terroir and environment. It's also cultural terroir and cultural connection. So by that, what I mean is, if you've been experimenting a lot because you have cultural relationships. So what do I mean? Temples. You have lots of temples within an area, so you've been experimenting a lot. You have communication of those experiments among a wide area. Then the chances of you doing different things is a little bit higher, isn't it? Because you're getting information in, you're sending information out. So that's one element. You have a historical element. So if your tea has been historically recognized as famous and as really good, then you've had imperial, and by that I mean the empire involvement in your area. There's been money, there's been attention, you involved yourself in competitions. That would be at the court, the emperor's court. So you have that. You also have in some of those regions local competitions. So when I think of local competitions, I think of all the really famous areas where green tea was produced and sent to the court in the Tang Dynasty, because all of those areas had a lot of competitions. And because the court really fostered that type of attitude. And as you have competition, that means you have farmers and you have producers, I should say, who are looking at particular varietals. Oh, this one's winning because it's got this type of flavor profile, or this one's not doing so well. It doesn't have the right flavor profile. Let me do this other thing. So you have those factors as well. So it isn't just the physicality of the hybrid itself or the physicality of the location. That stuff is all helpful. It's all extremely helpful, but it's the interactions of the humans in that area as well. You got to have all of those things going on in order to get a complete picture. You have to have an understanding of all of that, I think, to get a complete picture, including, and it's so interesting that the religious/spiritual connection plays such a big role, because that's what drove the tea production in the Wu Mountains. It also drove production in Anhui, because they were experimenting there. They were communicating all over the country because of the temples, both Taoist and Buddhist temples. And so you had this connection, and people were discussing and, in effect, doing science, so to speak. And so that's one of the reasons that trying to answer this question is so complicated. When you think about Yunnan, Yunnan is kind of a, even though we've seen the tea horse road, you got a lot of stuff leaving the area, you have some goods coming back, but do you have a lot of knowledge leaving the area? So there's a difference between stuff and knowledge, isn't there? Because if you're taking goods out as a trading route, but you're not taking it linked with actual production, that's different than when you are a monk in a tea producing temple or a tea producing monastery. And so you're traveling to other places. Oh, by the way, we handle this way. So that's a different feel to it than the feel of, oh, here's something we got from this area. And what do you have in your area? It's because there's no real exchange of human cultural IP, so to speak. And therefore, the development is quicker in areas where you have IP, human IP, cultural IP. And in those areas, there's also more of a tendency to trade the actual physical plant itself. So, say you're a Buddhist in Anhui, and the Tang Dynasty, and you're producing green tea. Say you're producing it in the Yellow Mountains, and you produce it a certain way, and then you're reassigned, or you're told to go down to Jiangxi or Jiangsu or Fujian province to such and such a temple, and here, take some tea and take a plant or two, and then you have something you can compare and talk about. And so that's why the development of tea in those areas was quicker. Anhui and Fujian, where there was a lot of this back and forth, were the leaders within China. Even though you had quite a bit of conservatism in Anhui province, particularly in Qimen County, you had huge amount of conservatism. You still had, at the temple level, an exchange. The conservatism was really limited to the peasants. So maybe they weren't doing so many experiments, but at the temple, they were doing plenty of experiments. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a different picture. And this is a really layered type of picture one has to have when discussing China, because of its history, and because, again, the influence, particularly the Taoists, of trying to look for elixirs, long life elixirs, and trying to figure out, well, is tea going to be part of that long life elixir? And, what sorts of things should I be experimenting with? So you just have a different feel. You didn't have as many Taoists in Yunnan. very few Taoists, as a matter of fact, in Yunnan. And part of that is, remember, Taoism was driven by Han Chinese. It wasn't really driven by Chinese minorities. And so that makes a difference. Because Yunnan, so much of Yunnan is inhabited by Chinese minorities. And so it's just a completely different feel in terms of what their thinking was. And by the way, though they did things differently in Yunnan, it isn't they chose to do things differently because, oh, I'm a minority and I'm very conservative. That's not what happened. What happened is I'm a minority. I live in this place of other indigenous peoples, very isolated. Yeah, we all have some sort of connection. And so therefore, our tea production is going to mirror to a degree each other, but it's not going to mirror what's going on in other parts of China. So let's step back a moment and think even a little deeper about this, because remembering that in Yunnan, you have this rise of raw black and fully fermented ancient trees. You didn't have ancient trees in central China. Long gone, long chopped down, not part of the cultural terroir, certainly not part of the tea terroir. Their ancientness in terms of tea were trees and bushes of the 400 and 500-year-old variety. We're not talking thousands of years. And so the result is it's just a different feel. And as a minority, the minorities were very conservative to a degree. And what I mean by this, okay, these terms are value laden and really have to be well defined. What I mean by this is language and custom had them living lives in a certain way, had them producing tea in a certain way, and had them doing it that way for a long time. That's what I mean by conservative. Doesn't mean I get up every day and think in a certain manner outside of a cultural manner. There's a cultural manner I'm going to think about every day. You know, I take tea tree as my totem. So I'm going to go to the center of the village every day or every week or however it is, whenever I'm going to go there. And I'm going to pay my respects to the old tea tree. That is custom. And that custom is passed down from generation to generation. And you can call that a type of conservatism. I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean is you are not doing, okay, now I'm walking around this in my head, and now I have a really clear idea where I'm going. You're not experimenting. Plain and simple, you're not experimenting. You don't have the impetus to experiment. Your totem is in your village. And as such, if there's experimentation, it's accidental. If somehow something gets fermented in a certain way that was unexpected, it's accidental. Yes.
So Jeremy asks, does your use of the conservative here mean just less innovation?
And that would be an excellent analysis, except instead of saying less, Jeremy poses the question, does that mean that when I use the word conservatism, I mean less innovation? What I really mean, and that's a great question because you're really getting your arms around this, is it's slower change. not necessarily a bent for less. There's fewer stimuluses fewer stimuli to change. Whereas if you're in a trade route where you have knowledge going back and forth, not just goods, but knowledge going back and forth, there's more stimulus to change. So that took a long time to come to that as I was walking around that. But this is an important question because, you look at Yunnan and you say, well, that they've been doing tea for clearly thousands of years. Why didn't they invent red tea? Why didn't they invent oolong tea? Well, they were outside of the main realm of communication and interchange. In 1368, when the Ming Dynasty emperor said, hey, no more green tea cakes, was Yunnan ever really doing green tea cakes? If so, it was on small scale. Theirs was a completely different thought pattern in Yunnan. And the sitter didn't care. Well, now I just made a false statement. It's not that the emperor didn't care. What he wanted was for that region not to be restive. That's what he wanted. He wanted peace. He wanted goods that were supposed to flow into the empire, and something that where everybody was able to get along. That's what the emperor was looking for. Wasn't looking to have officials coming out of that area. Okay. So again, as I walk through this, I realize there's other parts that I haven't given you. They had this Hanling Academy and I'm sorry, I know we weren't supposed to go to history with it. I really do know this, and I apologize that I can see I've gotten off on it. Okay, I'll get off the history track after I explain this one important thing. So they had the Hanling Academy out of whichever place in whichever dynasty it was where they had a capital. And this Hanli, and that's a complicated way to say that the capital moved around depending on the dynasty. It had a training location for the best of the scholars to go to train Chinese classics, Chinese traditions, to have intellectual ferment, to have knowledge and connection with not religious, but spiritual traditions. So you had all this exchange. That's where they got their officials. Officials passed the test. They went out into the Chinese Empire. They got positions. And the closer you were to the center, the more there was of intellectual ferment. The more there was of intellectual exchange. Remember, in the Tang Dynasty, oh, geez, I'm still in history. Well, I really am going to try and get off history here. In the Tang Dynasty, if you made a mistake at the court, and it wasn't a traitorous mistake, you made a traitorous mistake, you would get the results of making a traitorous mistake. But if you made an offensive mistake to the emperor or some big official, what happened? You got sent to places like Yunnan. That was the punishment. And why? Because that was as far away from the center as you could go. You were isolated. And this is what life, and so when I talk about there's less influence to change, it's because of that. It's so far away from the center. Okay. And I've gone so far away from, oh boy, I've exceeded time and gone so far away from talking about luxuriant bangs. I almost forgot what we were doing today. All right. All of you are thirsty after that unexpected trek through Chinese history.
I think it was expected, actually.
The producer says it was expected. Okay,
Not a bad thing.
not a bad thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and taste this luxuriant bangs. But before you do, let's have the tea master demonstrate to you, for you, luxuriant bangs. So without further ado, and without any more history drama, let's bring forth Biju, tea master.
Hi, good morning, everyone. 早上好。We do 祁门 red tea, 祁门红. Yeah, in China we call 祁红 哈. Yeah. So if you go to somewhere, the tea shop, call, when you order, the red tea from Anhui called 祁红. Oh, 祁红 red tea. So this is the whole, 多少分？ 4 4 grams, 4 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your usual setup. In this case, she set up 5 cups, but really you just need 2 cups, a strainer, ability to have 175-degree water, a timer so that you can set 4 minutes. She's going to make more than 1 cup at a time, and she uses these cups to cool. All right, she's going to use 3 cups to cool down the water faster. Remember, if you're going to make a water mistake in terms of temperature, you want cooler. You don't want hotter. So 170 is fine. 185, not so good. You flatten the flavor. She's heating the cups using, it doesn't matter. You can use any temperature between 175 and 200 when you heat, but when you steep, it's going to be 175 or less. So dissipating the steam, aerating the water, developing rhythm, doing all 3 things in this process. Rhythm is very important. You rush through this, you're going to rush through everything. You set a steady pace, you're going to have a steady pace through all steps, including the tasting steps. And there isn't the right speed for rhythm. Rhythm is the rhythm that you have inherently. And so some rhythm can be a little faster in actual speed. Some rhythm is going to be a little slower because that's the rhythm you bring. And that's okay. If you're chaotic, that's called lack of rhythm. Heat the tea leaves. You notice she poured the water into back in the kettle. Why did Biju do that? She did that. By the way, you set your timer for 4 minutes, or when you do it, you're going to set your timer for 4 minutes. Remember, this time you're just observing. Why did she pour the water back in the kettle? She poured the water back in the kettle because she could control better from the kettle than she can from another cup, the exact area where she pours in a cup. And so, because it's got that spout. So that's why she did that. All right. So Luxuriant Bangs is from a varietal that is a little bit longer leafed, and they do less of the handicraft processing. I didn't say they don't do, I just said that they do less because they don't shape it into a round. They don't kind of blend it with, and blend, I don't use in the sense that you're used to seeing it. By blend, what I really meant is they don't sort everything and by grade put all the same grade together. That's all I meant by blend. Here, there's less of that, but they still are doing it handcrafted. There's no difference in the first steps. It's a pick, and this is a bud and a leaf, generally speaking, for this pick. And this is a spring pick. And so out of all the processes, which process is going to end up influencing the aroma the most? It turns out it's going to be the oxidation process. So remember, you pick, you wither, you roll, that is, you break down the cells in the tea leaf, you make it available for the chlorophyll to interact with the enzyme in the leaf itself, and for all the liquid in the leaf to eventually come to the surface. After that, you actually oxidize. And you oxidize for a certain amount of time. When you're oxidizing and when all this chemical composition is coming together and kind of cooking, oh, I shouldn't have used that term because you're going to think heat is applied. Heat isn't applied. There is heat that's generated in the piles of the oxidized. So that's really what I meant. You start to go from grassy, the grassiness leaves. By the way, it starts to leave as soon as you wither. Then, in order of occurrence, you get floral / fruity, then sometimes a little chocolatey. You get these aromas start to appear in the oxidation process. And by varietal, it's all different. So that's why you have teas growing all over China being produced as reds, and they're all different. And by the way, you're going to have tea snobs. And the tea snobs are going to say, oh, yes, I went to Tanya and I got Pangyang Kung Fu tea. And they're going to look at you like you should know something. And given the fact that you're the one presenters, what you're going to know right away is that whoever says that to you is from that area, is showing off, and is using a certain type of just a certain attitude about their local tea, suggesting it's the best. Is it the best? Well, the best is somewhat subjective. Nonetheless, from a standard and from prizes and from exposure, the answer has to be no. You all are tasting the best. You all are exposed to the best. Chiman, the Dianhong, and the Fujian small varietals are all grouped as the best. Are the others really, really good? Yeah, they're really good. But, you know, if only 1,000 people can drink or less, can it be the best? And the answer is no, it cannot. All right. Luxuriant Bangs looks like this. Let's enter the quality arena. Take 175-degree sip. It's a little bit bigger than a 200-degree inhalation. And you're going to roll it around in your mouth. You're going to measure the astringency. By the way, you should have your notes out from previous sessions because this is going to be different. When you swallow, you're going to have a feeling, an aftertaste. You make a judgment about that. You take notes on that. And then you're going to have, how does this tea make you feel? We call that energetics. So let's do it. No, you don't do it. I'll do it. I'll demonstrate this, what I'm doing. Oh my goodness, this is different. It's different than the previous 2 weeks. It is identifiable as a Chi Hun, but it's different than the last 2 weeks. Location of astringency is different. Gain a little bit of a different aftertaste. All right, it's your turn to brew.
Jennifer shares the warm, dry leaves smell woodsy, chocolatey, like sweet stone fruit. And then there's this wisp of something, maybe floral, that I could barely discern.
Warm, dry leaves, woodsy, chocolatey, and a slight hint of floral. And something else that's a little,
A sweet stone fruit.
I'm sorry, sweet stone fruit. Thank you very much. Jennifer identifies these things in the warm leaves. And this is good. When you are going through this quality arena, you are doing it step by step and you're looking for these things. And this is what makes you the 1%ers, because you know to look for this stuff. All right. And what you're doing is dissipating the steam, aerating the water. Making sure all the cups are heated. Because remember, the magic of doing tea, and the magic that you already understand is you can't just take tea, well, you can do anything you want. But if you're going to have it really, really good, you're going to go through these steps. And one of the things that distinguishes Sophie's from almost everybody else is we take the time to go through with you how to actually brew and how you should brew. Most of the places that sell you tea, that sell tea, they have generic instructions. In fact, it always feels to me when I look at the instructions, oh, they just copied some other company's instructions, slapped it on, and called it, this is how you appreciate the tea. And they don't talk to you about methodology. This is a 4-minute step. Okay. So what I was getting to when talking about the steps of aroma and the steps of taste as they develop, if they're on average oxidizing to about 90% or 91%. Is this just because, oh, this is just good enough. I can get it to this point and this is just good enough and I can get it to market. And I'll make the money I'm gonna make. And I don't have to go that extra 9% to get 100% oxidized. Answer is no. So the next thing that occurs after you get through that really pleasant set of flavors and aromas that I said, then you enter a 4-letter space. These 4 letters are the worst curse you can say in the tea industry. Oh, your tea is sour. Sour is a farmer mistake. It's not a hybrid mistake. It's not a storage mistake. It's a processing mistake. You've over-oxidized. Have we ever tasted sour tea before? The answer is yes. Did we complain? The answer is yes to that. And then, the farmer didn't like how we called it out, but realized, oh, wait a minute. Yes. Oh, this is easy to fix. That's what we heard. This is easy to fix. So I ask you this. Let's say you're making, what do you all like to make? Let's say you're making cookies. Say you're making Toll House cookies. And the recipe says, okay, you're supposed to do this, this, and that. Put the drops or the spoonfuls on the cookie sheet, put it in the oven for 12 minutes. 20 minutes later, you come back. Oh, this is toasted. No, it's burnt. Can you correct that? Oh, just scrape it off. That's a no also. It doesn't work that way. That's just like the farmer saying with the sour. In effect, well, let's just scrape that off and get underneath that. No, you have spoiled a batch and it's really, really, really hard to recover from that. So that's why they stop at a certain place. And that's what experience has taught them, because they've all experienced sour and they all know right away, oh my God, that's a mistake. Can't do that. Can't put that on the market. And it's really, really hard to correct that. Oh, timer's gone off. Now you're going to separate the tea leaves from the tea water. Nice rhythm. Now get out your notes. You're going to enter the quality arena. You saw me demonstrate the quality arena. That's what you should do now. Take notes on what you're going to try here. And remember, the first time through, it's about astringency and where it is on the tongue. And then it's about aftertaste. And then it's about energetics. Second time through, it's about all those things in terms of verification. Yeah, this is really what I'm feeling. And aroma and taste. Yes.
Jeremy says, this is so slurpable. Tiny front of mouth, dryness, easy swallow, pleasant to the core, warming. Can't define the aroma. So many elements combine. Just pleasurable.
So Jeremy starts off right away and says, very pleasurable. Slurpable is how she put it. with easy on the tongue, light astringency,
Follow.
easy
warm.
swallow, grounding, warming, all of the things combined. And this is a great start to understanding this tea because all the craft teas, the Kung Fu teas, Tungo teas, have some element of these things, some more so than others. But if it doesn't have this element, it's not a crafted tea. Yes.
Peter says, at first taste, I'm immediately hit with the sense that the tea is carried on a water base. In other words, there's a watery quality to it. The second and next sips then give way, and the tea begins to reveal itself. Astringency lingers for me at mid-tongue.
For Peter, astringency at mid-tongue, and he has an interesting entree into this. And I like this because I've not heard this entree before, but I get it. And it's like in the beginning, the watery quality of the tea is prominent. And then only as he goes presumably to a second and third sip, does the full force of the tea make itself known. And I love this description because it talks not only about the tea, but it also talks about your preparation, because not everybody's going to get that, because not everybody came to tasting tea this morning in the same way. So some of you may have had another tea before you came. Some of you may have eaten something before you came. Some of you may have had water before you came. So there's all sorts of ways that you come to tea. And once you're here, your first impressions, at some point, everybody's gets real close. In the beginning, there actually can be some distance, but by the second or third sip, it becomes real close. And that's why I like the fact that Peter was unafraid to talk about a wateriness. And I get this, and good job. Yeah.
Rob shares, the tea water has a cider-like scent. It's round with malt in the background. The taste has a dried stone fruit sweetness with a bit of malt and a wet drying on the tongue.
Wet drying on the tongue for Rob, a hint of malt, a hint of stone fruit sweetness, and a roundness to this. I like this description particularly because he led with roundness. There is roundness to this. There is nothing, and again, this shows you the craft nature. You know, I keep going back to craft. What are our choices? And I'm not done with this comment, but I want to digress here for a second. What are our choices? Well, we can have granular. That is a tea that isn't uniform, not crafted, fewer steps. We can have powder. Does powder sound good to you? Doesn't sound good to me. That's like the stuff that's left over after everything else is taken care of. But when you're thinking of red slash in the West, black tea, typically people live in the granular and in the powder. Not so many people get to this, what you're having. And that's why I'm making this distinction, because who else do you ever hear saying, oh, yes, rounded, grounding, stone fruit, sweet? Where do you hear those commentary? Oh, you do hear them. You hear the sweet. It's just like, you know, I didn't talk about news this week very much, but we had a family from who knows where walk through, and they were so excited that we had red slash black tea. And everybody had placed an order, was ready to go, And one of the family members said, "Oh, where's the table with honey and sugar?" Family left without drinking any tea once they found out that this place was devoid of. They couldn't imagine sweetness, roundness, stone fruit. They couldn't imagine it because all their lives they had had sugar and milk in their tea. And this is again what really distinguishes you, because you can talk about these things and you understand how to reach these things. Yes. So again, the crafted teas. So soon as you hear the word Gongfu or Tsungo, and Tsungo, Congou, meaning that they've taken extra steps to make it uniform, to somehow by leaf pay attention to the tea. And what does that mean by leaf to pay attention? Remember, no machinery was involved in the picking of this. No harm was done to the leaves in the picking. This was by hand. So every leaf group, and in this case, leaf and bud, had hand touch to it. And everything was processed to end up with a uniform result. And that's why they went through so many steps. Do you think in the big factories, whether it's in Kenya or anywhere else in the world, that the hand touches the tea? No, they are wearing gloves. ISO 90 million says, oh, you're not supposed to touch tea leaves, and it's supposed to go in this thing and come out this thing and be all chopped up and in tea bags. That's the ISO standard. I ask you this: what tea do you know is always touched by hand? It's always the tea you want to drink. Yes.
Cungou, C-U-N-G, and then G-U-O-U.
No, G-O-U.
G-O-U.
And that's for those of you who are in the 0.5%. You're the 0.5%ers, because even in the 1%ers, most people don't know that term. But that is a term, particularly in writing in China, that you'll see. You'll almost never hear it said in China. Gongfu is what you'll hear said. And by the way, it's the same characters as this type of Gongfu. Is it the same characters? Let me think about that. Yeah, it is the same characters, but it is really about craftsmanship. So just like in the fighting Gongfu, that's not about just waving your fists around and making a lot of noise, and then all of a sudden your opponent falls over. Well, actually, if that was what happened, that would be real Gongfu. You catch the point where I was going though. Yes. Okay. All right. As usual, I've exceeded the time. And today I apologize because somehow I don't even know how I got into history today. And I thought I promised you before that we were just about done with history. Well, I guess I shouldn't make any prognostications about the next 3 sessions, because it will be surely that if I say we're going to talk about history again, that next week, the first words out of my mouth will be about history. So instead, what I'm going to say is weeks 7, 8, and 9 are special. Peon, Elysian, Talisman. 2 out of the 3 of those are Fujian reds. Oh my God. Really the home red. One of those is a Xiaozhong. You're in for a special treat over these next 3 sessions. And we'll wrap up the reds. We really wanted to wrap, all 3 of these are extraordinary reds. They're so extraordinary, they're not even on the board. You have to know that these exist. Now, among those of you who come all the time, you know these things exist. So you just call out those names while everybody else in the shop looks around. Where's that tea? Look, look, look. They can't find it and they think their eyes are bad. No, this is because these real crafted teas, we have quite a number of them. The number is about 20 now that we haven't put on the board. And one of the reasons is we're still considering location. And the other part of it is we're very close to running out quite a lot of stuff. And so and you're starting to see, because we are starting to put up new stuff, changes on the board. So that's what we're going to do weeks 7, 8, and 9 of this series. As usual today, really an interesting set of questions. And going off into the history was really interesting for me, because trying to get you connected to the cultural component of tea. This is always, in the final analysis, what makes Chinese tea so different. Because each region has a cultural component. Yeah, the hybrids are different. Yeah, the age is different, size is different, but it's the cultural component that really makes a huge difference. And here at Sophie's, it's you 1%ers who really make a difference. Without you, I could hardly be in existence. So I salute you for all your great commentary today. Your responsibility this week is to stay healthy. And we look forward to seeing you next week. You take care now. Bye-bye.
Take care.